Hello YouTube, Marauders here, and today we have the SNS Joi8 8-inch Windows tablet. So this is one of the new breed of Windows tablets in the sense that it is relatively cheaper than its closest than previous Windows tablets. It is almost half the price of the Acer W4, and it has extremely low specifications to match that extremely low price. So we'll take a look at and see how well it works and how well it performs. Now, first of all, I'd like to remind you that this is a very relatively cheap piece of Windows tablet. It costs Ringgit Malaysia 499, so that's about 159 USD. So in the review, you're gonna hear a lot of buts, but of course you have to take into account the fact that of the extremely low price, of course. Okay, so without further ado, let's go talk about the physical appearance of it. So it's just a normal, on the front it's just a typical tablet, glass, probably plastic or something. Then the back, it's a full metal body, and I don't know, but I think the back here is going to be pretty prone to scratching. As you can see, it's already scuffed up a bit by when I just put it on the table and just moved it a bit, so you can see it's a bit scuffed up. Then on the back you can see that the speaker ports are here. It's just aligned on the back. So it's pretty typical of tablets. Let me just, okay, camera's having a hard time focusing on the flat grill. Okay, so you have your speakers and you have your camera. Okay, nothing else much there. Now, because it's a metal body, so to me it feels light, but you can still feel that it's there. It's not inconsequential. But I'm a poor judge of weight, so let's ask someone who is more picky about it. Is it too heavy? Is it heavy?
No.
Will you feel like taking it and watching videos with it?
Does it come with stand?
No?
Maybe.
So it's not heavy.
It's not heavy.
Okay. And okay, so my wife says it's not heavy, so it's basically light enough for you to hold and watch videos if you want to. Next, moving on, for those of you who are interested in heat modeling, roughly the entire back plate of the tablet gets hot. So it's not confined to any one area. I guess the battery is probably at the back here. So the entire back gets hot. Now we have here on the side, let's take a look at the side. We have the power button. We have the earphone plug. So this is headset compatible. If you have if you have the ones where they come with one plug and it has the earphone and the mic, you just plug it in. You can use it as a headset for your Skype calls. You have a micro USB port, and something which I would like to point out is that even though this is a cheap micro USB port, even though this is a cheap Windows tablet, they actually come with it came with a micro USB cable. So seriously, if someone like this can include a micro USB cable, why can't Dell or Asus give one with their tablets? Seriously. And then you have a HDMI out, but it's a mini HDMI port. Instead of a regular size HDMI port or a micro HDMI port, for some reason they put a mini HDMI port here. I really don't know why they decided to do it. Then of course you have your micro SD slot, and since this is running Windows, this will support up to SDXC. And you have your power charging, you have your power plug input. Now some of you might be worried that as I was, that because it has a separate power input, you can't actually charge using the micro USB. Well, I'm happy to say that even though you have a power jack, you can actually still charge with the USB port if you want to. But the current draw on USB charging is actually extremely low. It just draws about 1 amp. So even if you could charge it with the micro USB, it's probably going to take a long time to do it. So in a pinch it will work, but it's probably more recommended that you charge using the DC power so that it's a bit faster. Then of course you have your microphone hole here. Moving on to the top, there are just two buttons here. One is the Windows button and one is the volume control. Now, the interesting thing about the volume control here is that this is volume up and this is volume down. It makes sense when you're holding a tablet in landscape position. So up is to the right and down is to the left, which is normal. But if you're holding it in a portrait position, it kind of gets messed up. So just an annoyance, I guess. They just basically designed it to be landscape primarily. Now I would like to tell you how well the cameras work, but if you notice, the camera light is actually on because my camera's busted. There's something on the hardware circuitry here and I haven't been able to get a replacement yet. Basically the camera light seems to be constantly engaged, but in Windows you can see that it's actually off. The device is off. So I guess it's one of the problems that you have to deal with all these cheap devices, which is you have some hardware QC issues. So please be aware of it when you buy yours and just turn it on and check it out. Now, battery life wise, Windows reports that it has about 4 to 6 hours of typical usage, which is about right for an Intel Atom Bay Trail class tablet. So that's more or less accurate. Of course, this is based on your normal moderate to moderate use, and not if you're watching videos or something that's heavy on the CPU. It's probably gonna last much lesser. Now let's move on to the screen. So this is it's actually an IPS screen, so you can see that the view angle is fantastic. It's not a TFT screen, and so you get very good view angles. The screen is of course a bit sunken in, so you get some glare at the angles, but you have visibility throughout from a wide angle of visibility, so that's not an issue. But even though it's an IPS screen and everything, the issue here is that, to me, I feel that the IPS screen isn't very bright. Even though you set it at the maximum brightness, I feel that the screen brightness just isn't bright if I compare it to something like the Acer W4. It's actually much lighter than other screens that I've seen. So it's an annoyance. You might feel that it's not bright enough, especially if you compare it with other Windows tablets, but it's still usable. But I don't think it's gonna be very usable outside in bright daylight, under sunlight. So please take note of that. Now, in terms of media playback, the Atom 3735 really has not much issue, just like its the other Bay Trail kin. So here I have the 4K video, which I've been testing on the other Bay Trail Windows tablets, and we'll see the performance here. Okay, just need to get smoothen out. Now you can see that it's playing at 24 frames, which is what it's supposed to be. So as long as it has high rate acceleration, which is doing right now, there's really not much of an issue with video playback. And even when you play files that you don't have high rate acceleration, like high 10p video files, there's really not much issue here. There is enough horsepower to watch the videos. As the caveat is, of course, that since this guy only has 1 gig of system RAM, you probably shouldn't multitask on this system at all when you're watching videos. But other than that, if you're just concentrating on doing media watching media instead of doing anything else, it's good enough to get the job done. Now, one thing I like to point out is that the edge sensitivity of the touchscreen's accuracy of the touchscreen seems to be a little bit off. It could possibly be because of the fact that the screen is actually a bit sunken down, but well, it's a bit annoying, but you can kind of get used to it. And of course, like I always mention, do install the touch mouse pointer, the awesome touch pointer, to help you with your Windows tablet functionalities. So I've touched on the fact that this is running a very low spec system. So, and the fact is, not only does it only have 1 gig of RAM, if we look at the disk space, it only has 10 gigs left on the hard disk. That's because the SSD size is essentially only 16 gigs. So your actual usable space after when you first, the actual usable partition is actually about 10 gig, but after the initial boot, you're left with 5 gigs. And if you choose to install Office 365, you are left with 2.5 gigs. And if you choose to install Steam, you're left with 1.9 gigs. So you don't have much left on the system drive. Now, if you're thinking I could offset that with a SD card, you would be correct. But the problem here is that if you want to install anything on the Windows App Store, you are never able. Those apps cannot reside on the SD card at this moment. It must reside on the system drive. So since you only have 1.9 gigs left after you run Steam, you have to remember that Windows actually needs temporary drive space to do things like store your updates, maybe handle some temporary files, and some other operational things. So have that 1.9 gig quickly degenerates down to 800, 500 meg, and that gets very bad during Windows operation. And to that fact, that becomes a very big issue with the Joi 8, which is that space is at a very high premium here. If you know it, it's very likely that if you do install Office, you're pretty much shutting yourself out from running any sort of Windows Store apps. Okay, let's not argue about how many apps that you might actually want to use in Windows Store at this point of time. But the thing here is, even if you want to, it will be very limited because you have very limited space for it. Probably you can't install any large game anymore after that. And so from a price perspective, the Joi 8 is actually has some very attractive points to it. Because first of all, it's only 499 ringgit. But you get included in the box, you get an Office 365 1 year worth of Office 365 subscription, and that has a value of 199 ringgit. So that already means that means that this tablet is actually just 300 ringgit if you discount the fact that you have Office 365. And then along with your Office 365 subscription, you get 1 terabyte worth of OneDrive space, which again costs some amount of money if you're doing it elsewhere. And more importantly, something special is the fact that you get 60 minutes of Skype dial-up time a month. This is not 60 minutes in total. This is 60 minutes a month. So you can use, if you're in Malaysia, you could use Skype to call landlines for 60 minutes a month for free, if once you register the Office 365 account, which is, of course, that also brings value of its own. So if you're the kind of person to think like that, this is already not a $499 tablet. This is actually much cheaper than that already, probably at the 250 or 300 ringgit. So it in that matter, it brings pretty good value. You have a x86 processor, you have a small tablet, you get free Office with it. So and you can run Word and Excel. This is the full Word and Excel. This is not Windows RT. That's something I need to remind you all. So that's a very good value proposition. But of course, you have to also decide whether that is good enough for you, because like I said, 16 while 1 gig RAM is sufficient to run Windows, and you can check out my other Windows demo, which I'll link to. While 1 gig of RAM is enough, 16 gigs of storage is definitely not enough to run Windows properly. So you have that small nagging issue there, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to take the risk. You just have to know what is it that you're getting the Joi 8 for, to know whether that is going to be a problem for you or not. And of course, the other issue is that you have to realize that there might be some hardware issues like what I'm getting on the camera, so do remember to test it out. And one last thing that I forgot to point out initially is that one thing that surprised me was that when you get the Joi 8, there's already a screen protector attached on it. So someone on the manufacturing line had to apply a screen protector onto every single Joi 8 that left the factory. The only thing I can say is I salute the guy who has to be the one that applies bubble-free screen protectors on a factory line. Seriously. Okay, so that's it about the Joi 8 tablet, and the final say is that yes, it is a very relatively cheap Windows tablet, and it actually serves quite well as a web browser, media device. And since you can install Office on it, it can actually work as an Office device if you can get since you have a USB port anyway, so you can get a keyboard or something, you can actually use Office to do light tasks on it. So should you get it? Given the fact that there is that nagging 16 gig issue, you have to ask yourself whether or not, if you only need Office, yes, it's a viable solution. If you want to use Windows apps on the Windows Store, you have to choose between installing Office or installing apps on the Windows Store. If not, that 16 gig is probably not going to be enough. Once you figure that answer out, yep, sure, go ahead, buy the Joi 8 if you want to. Okay, this is Marauders, and bye bye.